Monday's not a new chapter because Monday we're just going to play.
Yeah.
So Monday we'll play with some of the ideas from chapter 3 because really for the rest of the semester we go back to concentrating on developmental sequences and perceptions and things like that. And so I want you to keep thinking about, but when I look at the sequence, how does the mechanics affect the sequence and why I see it the way I do? Okay? Because there's a reason we get the sequence in the order that we do, and generally the reason is to do with the brain's manipulation of biomechanics. All right? So Monday we'll play, that means the start of the new chapter will be Wednesday. Okay, so be ready for that. All right, so we got to law number 3. If you guys over here in the dark need to be right, creating little light bulbs, otherwise we'll have to turn the lights back on, guys. You can't be sitting over here dozing off, right? We need to, it would be nice if they would rewire the room to help you out. But, law number 3. All right, so what was law number 1? Who remembers law number 1?
Object at rest, think of it.
Yes, okay, good. Object at rest is going to stay at rest, so the object could be me, the object could be a ball or a bat, right? It's going to stay at rest, and if the object is in motion, it will stay in motion until an external force is applied to it, right? So we have to apply a force to start something moving and to stop something moving or to change the direction of something that's already moving. Okay? What about law number 2?
Mass acceleration.
Yes. Go on. Force equals
Meters per second. Mass times acceleration.
mass times acceleration, right? So the force that an object can produce is linked to the mass of the object times the acceleration of the object. Okay? Law number 3. And sometimes law number 3 is the one that people have heard of because we often use this kind of terminology in everyday language. For every reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Okay? So that saying has kind of worked its way into the normal language. What that means mechanically is that when I push on something, when I apply force to something, it pushes back on me with the same amount of force. Right? Or if the ball applies force to the bat applies force back to the ball. Right? So think about when we're walking. Right? When I take a step, what would happen if the floor didn't push back?
You fall through.
You go through the floor, right? So, if I step on sand, how do you know there's been someone on the beach before you got there? Footprints, right? Why do I get footprints? I get footprints because the ability of the sand to push back doesn't equal the force the person pushed on the sand, and so your foot sinks into the sand. Footprint for a little person is not as deep as the footprint for a big heavy person, right? If I'm a great big 7-foot linebacker, my footprint's going to be way deeper than if I'm a little 4'7" gymnast, right? Does that make sense? If I walk on a thin layer of ice, what could happen? Go through the ice, right? Because the ice can't apply the same amount of force back, you apply the sum of the forces, is you end up in the water. Okay. Hopefully not drowning, so we don't walk on thin ice. Okay. It's always weird to me that, because in England, you never walk on ice. Right? If there's a pond, the ice is over, you do not, it's the first thing you learn, right? You do not walk on ice. It's never deep enough, apparently. When the first time I went to Milwaukee with my partner in the winter, and we went down the local park, and he's just like running out, and I'm like, oh my! He's laughing at me, because over here it gets so cold, so much of the water freezes, it's able to apply an equivalent force and you don't go through. Right? But that's not my background, so it's taking me a while to get used to that idea. So when something pushes on you, when you push on something, it's going to push you back. So when I'm walking then, right, we know we're pushing on the floor, and clearly the floor is able to push back with a force that the sum of the forces is I don't go through the floor if I'm on a regular floor. Okay. How am I moving forwards? What forces are being applied?
Pushing backward.
I'm pushing backwards. Am I moving backwards?
No.
So what's the floor doing?
Pushing forward.
Pushing forwards, right? So when you walk, as an adult, you push, whether you're aware of it or not, because it's something you do so much, it's kind of grooved and you don't really think about what you do, right? But what is happening when you walk, you push down and back, right? But it isn't you pushing back that propels you forwards. What you have to remember is what makes you move forwards is the floor pushes up and forwards. Okay? So I move forwards. Okay. If I'm running, if I'm going faster, it means I'm applying more force and more force is coming back. If I run on the sand, the depth of the footprint is deeper than if I walk on the sand, because the imbalance of forces is greater. Okay. That idea makes a lot of sense then when you go back and think about what we said fundamental running looks like. Okay. Stage 1 of running. Wide feet, arms high, flat foot. Am I moving forwards very fast? No, because the first thing the brain does is apply the force down. Right? That's the first thing it learns. Push down on the floor. Well, that's great. The floor pushes me up, and I bob up and down, and it takes a very long time to get to where I want to go. Right? So for that trend in running, for that developmental sequence in running to occur, part of what has to happen is the brain has to learn how to push down and back so that the running can move forwards rather than bob up and down. Right? When we watch the little long jump film, right, and the first little tiny girl did this, right? All the force was down. So she didn't really jump forwards. The next little girl jumped forwards quite a lot. The arm swing was wrong, right? But she had clearly learned to push down and back. Make sense? So you can use the principles to explain why we see the change. The brain's always trying to optimize the mechanical principles in relation to the constraints you have as a person. Right? Because sometimes it's easier to optimize principles if I've got great long legs versus short legs. Right? Great long arms versus short arms. So here, right? Here he's pushing down and back quite a lot because he's moving forwards quite fast. The next thing we see is his arms moving in opposition. And that's another example of this action-reaction type idea. If I stand here and swing my leg, one or two things happens. Either, if I swing it hard enough, my opposite arm will start swinging. Right? Because as I swing this, it twists my hips, that twists, my upper body has to go the other way in reaction to my hips turning, and that pushes this arm forward. So even if I didn't mean to swing my arms, we're going to see arms start to move a little bit in opposition. Then what you want to do as the coach is go, okay, now swing them harder and make it a more conscious thing so that we get some good arm pumping. Okay? So the free leg swinging when we run encourages the arms to move in opposition. The harder I move the leg, the more the arms are going to move. Okay. Something to look out for, right? Because what if I swing my arms, but they're going this way? So a lot of people run and use their arms too much side to side and not forward. So if I'm a sprint coach in particular, if what I want is forceful, fast running, one of the coaching cues you get a lot of is push forwards with your hands, right? I want plain arm motion. So we want to exert force in the direction of the movement. So I want to keep it in the plane of motion in particular. I don't want to apply a force that is contradictory, that is going to take some of the force and the motion to another angle, right? I don't want to add a rotational movement. So this is not very effective. This is much more effective. Well, if I'm not running very fast, if I'm only running at 5 or 6 miles an hour, right, I'm just going out for a jog, then this probably doesn't matter very much. Because I'm not going fast enough, I don't need to go fast enough to make the arm action too inefficient. But if I'm trying to go fast, we want everything we're doing to be in the same plane. Okay. You watch people from the back, and sometimes what you'll see is as their foot leaves the floor, the foot swings out sideways. Okay. That means somewhere I was applying a force that was not in that. Probably as I planted my foot and I was pushing to the side a little bit. So we don't want to apply undesired forces in the wrong plane. So, a lot of times in sport, what's important is speed, velocity, right? Speed in a particular direction, not just general speed. So the goal quite often is to increase the speed, because then the ball, the javelin, the person goes further. So how can I do that using the principles? Okay. I can increase rotational velocity. Right? So linear velocity, okay, velocity in a straight line. So once I've left the floor, or once the javelin has left my hand, or the ball has left my hand. Okay. Linear velocity equals rotational velocity multiplied by the radius of rotation. So how fast the ball will travel, how fast the javelin will go, and therefore how far it's going to go, given the right trajectory. Right. Depends upon how quickly I can move my arm and how big the circle is. So I can increase rotational velocity, right? Clearly that would increase linear velocity. So I can move my arm faster. All right, but that's going to take time because I would have to get stronger and I would have to increase my range of motion. I would have to get more flexible in order to do that. So I can't impact that on a given day. Okay. The other thing then is what can I do with the radius of rotation? So I have to make the radius of rotation as big as possible. That means when you look at people who play soccer or people who throw a ball hard and fast, so baseball pitchers overhand or a softball pitcher underhand, right? When they release the object, a javelin thrower, javelin's a great one. Okay? I would really recommend trying to find a little clip of javelin on YouTube or something, because mechanically they exaggerate everything that happens, and so they run quite fast up the runway, given that they're carrying this great big long spear. They take a humongous step in. There's tons of rotation, and when they release the javelin, they do exactly what you want here. So it's a really good example to look at, right? We want the biggest radius possible. So when I throw, if I throw like this, that is not going to be as fast as if I throw like this. So when you slow down film of people who are very good at kicking or very good at throwing, right before the point of release or the point of contact, if it's a kick, you watch a rugby player taking a penalty, that's a really good example, right? Then right at the point that they're going to release the ball, they are here, right? Watch a tennis serve. The people who serve like this don't serve very fast, right? If I'm going to serve fast, I have to toss the ball high enough that when I make contact with the ball, this is as long as possible, right? When I kick, I have to straighten the leg just before I make contact with the ball, so that that's as long as possible. That make sense? So then the argument would be then, if having the radius of rotation as long as possible is beneficial for speed and force, see if I can, ooh, I need a slower version, I can't, right? Oop, wrong point. He straightens his leg after he's kicked the ball. we had a slow-mo on him. Okay? As he toes the ball, his knee is bent. Okay? His leg straightens just before he kicks. Big knee bend at the back. Straightens the leg just before he kicks. So then, if having this big long radial arm is beneficial, why would I not just keep my arms straight the whole time? Okay. And that's because, if we go back to that idea of inertia, how much force does it take to overcome the resistance to movement, right? The bigger something is, the longer something is, the more resistance to movement there is. That means I have to apply more force to move my arm like that than I do to move my arm like that, right? Well, the amount of force that would take, I would wreck my shoulder very, very quickly, and I wouldn't be able to compete. Right? As it is, people who throw a lot wreck their shoulders quite often because it's a lot of force on a relatively small joint. Right? Some of the speeds they're trying to throw at. So we compromise basically, right? I shorten the limb or the segment in order to swing it, but that means I have to get the timing of straightening it really good, right? The timing has to be bang on in order to get the most speed out of the object. If I straighten it a little bit too early, chances are I'll be slowing down by the time I release or hit. If I straighten it too late, it's not going to go very fast. So the timing becomes really key. The coordination of at what point do I straighten my arm right at the last minute, or my leg right at the last minute. So inertia, when we're looking at in rotation, is based on the mass by the rotational radius, right? So if I keep the leg short, that has way less inertia than if I'm trying to do this. Okay? So it's just mechanics, it's stuff, like you see this every day. If you watch someone throwing really well and someone throwing poorly, one of the things, especially if you had it on film, one of the things you would pick up because you're experienced is their arm is bent when they release the ball. And you'd say, well, you know, work on straightening your arm when you release the ball, but why? I said the other day, it's not just the correction. You've got to know the why you're making the correction. That's what will make you better than someone else as a teacher. If I know why this would improve it. The other thing is, you can't teach this, right? Inertia. If I'm going to tell this person to straighten their arm or straighten their leg, I'd better make sure enough they're strong enough to cope with the amount of force that that is going to require. Because it significantly changes inertia at a crucial point of the skill. If they're not strong enough to deal with that, then the outcome of the skill won't be right anyway. So I have to make sure they're strong enough to cope with the additional force that's required to do the correct biomechanics. Make sense? Question? Question? Hang in there. All right. So, principles we have to be thinking about when we're looking at law number 3, force and time. So if I'm going to make an object move, law number 1, I have to increase the force application for a given time. The longer I can apply the force, the easier it is to move the object, right? They talk about karate chopping with bricks. Ever seen that, right? Someone's got this great big pile of bricks and they karate chop and the bricks all split, right? Assuming it's not a fake and the bricks weren't kind of damaged in some way. It's all about how do they increase the force application for a given time, right? How strong are they in relation to the bricks? How much time can they get the side of their hand on the brick? If I'm going to stop something then, I want to decrease the impact, I've got to increase the time over which the force is applied. So when you catch, what do you do when you catch? With your hands.
Cushion.
Right. Okay, so you would tell someone, if I stand there with my arms straight and my hands out and the ball hits my hands and I shut, even if I shut my fingers, it's likely the ball is going to bounce out of my hand. Okay? So if I want to stop the force of that object, I have to absorb the force. I have to increase the time over which the force is applied to give me the opportunity to absorb it. Right? We do that when we jump. Okay, stand up. Everybody stand up. It's Friday, we need to wake up again. Everybody stand up. Okay, be careful. Do not jump very high. Right? Jump and land with your legs straight. Keep your legs straight. You bend your knees. Keep your legs straight. Hit the floor. What happens when you hit the floor? Hurts your knees. Where do you feel? Does your brain bounce around inside your skull? Right? That's for me. I must have a very little brain on. Right? If I don't bend, when I hit the floor, I can feel it all the way up my back and my brain goes doing. Okay? Now, jump and bend your knees when you land. Does your brain go doing? No. Because by bending your knees, gives you time to absorb the applied force from the floor. Okay? So the more supple your ankles are, the better that becomes. Because your ankles give you more time. If I have tight ankles and all I'm doing is bending my knees and possibly my hips, right? The more joints I can allow to bend and give way, the more time I get to absorb the force. So if I've got nice supple Achilles and nice mobile ankles and knees and hips, then that gives me plenty of time to absorb that ground reaction force. And then I don't get hurt as much. Right? Okay. The other option is instead of increasing the time, I can increase the area over which the force is applied. So sometimes, if we're looking at gymnastics, depending on where the camera is placed, right, sometimes the girls cheat a little bit. Because not only do they bend their knees a lot, but they'll land with their feet apart and they'll pull their feet together as they stand up, right? Because the wider the base, the more I can absorb the force. Right? If you think about judo, then when you're thrown, they tell you to put your arm out. Right? If I fall, I want to fall on the biggest surface area possible, because that spreads the force out. And then all that force isn't on one particular place, and I don't get hurt. So one of the things we fall, we put our hand down. That's the worst thing you can do, right? Because then you break your wrist if you're lucky, break your elbow if you're unlucky, dislocate your shoulder if you're really unlucky, right? Because all that force, as you hit the floor, the ground reaction force is going through a very small surface area. And I can't absorb that force, and so it blows out and causes an injury. Right? If I fall, it'd be really good if I could twist and just land on my back. Because then it's going to hurt, but I'm less likely to get as hurt as I am if I land just on one hand. Okay, what about stability and balance? So earlier, when we were starting chapter 3 on Wednesday, and we were talking about the center of gravity, right? Fictitious, this kind of abstract point in the body where all forces are acting. That's really a key point when we're looking at stability. So stability and balance are very important principles to take into account when we're teaching movement skills, because people don't like to fall over generally. Some do. We have one child on the playground who will deliberately fall over because it's just the most fun, apparently. But one of these days he's going to get hurt bad and it won't be so fun. Right? So stability, when we're looking at terminology, we've got to understand the difference between stability and balance. Stability is how well can I resist movement or disruption to my movement, right? So how well am I able to resist the disruption?
So the force can guide to the point.
Yes. So if I'm on a wobble board, right, how well am I able to resist the disruption to the movement? Balance means how well can I maintain equilibrium? And so what we get is a stability-mobility trade-off. So when I start to walk or I start to run, the first thing we do is this, because this is very, very stable, and I'm on balance, and I'm not at very much risk of falling over. Right? If I want to walk or run in a mature way, then I have to balance on a very small surface for quite a long time before the next foot goes on the floor. Right? If I'm walking, I'm going to have a point in time where both feet are on the floor and I'm reasonably stable again. This is unstable, this is more stable. If I'm running, that's what made running so much harder. Right? I only ever have one foot on the floor at any one time. I've got to have pretty good balance. I want to be stable. I don't want to be falling over when I start to run. So generally, stability, mobility, trade-off. If I want to be stable, chances are I'm not going to be very mobile. The skill is not going to be very quick. It's going to take a while to achieve the goal of the skill. To be more mobile, right, I have to be less stable. That means I've got to be strong enough to be less stable. Does that make sense? So when we look at walking, what's going to happen with your grandparents? Right? When your grandparents are in their 80s, are they going to want to go fast to achieve the goal, or are they going to want to be stable and achieve the goal? Right? How is that going to impact what you see when they move. So how do I increase stability? Right? Increase the base of support. Lower the center of gravity. So football players, when you're going to get hit, what does coach tell you to do?
Lower your shoulders.
Lower your shoulders. Bend your knees. Right? Does he want you to stand up here?
No.
Right? Bend your knees. Get down. Have your leg. Why do I want my legs wide?
More balance.
Increases my base of support. Depending on the coach, they may say you want one foot in front of the other because now I increase the base of the support front back as well as side side. Right? If I want to be stable, I've got to be down here. It's much harder to knock me over here than it is to knock me over here. Yeah? Increasing balance. So I want to be in equilibrium. I don't want to be tipping over. First off, got to increase the stability. So I have to do this first. I've got to improve strength. Because if I'm going to be down here, my legs had better be strong enough to deal with it. Okay. Coordination. At what point do I drop down in relation to the skill? And we'll talk about proprioception later in the semester, right? If I'm getting lots and lots of good feedback from sensory organs in my ankles and my knees and my hips, that helps my brain know where my center of gravity is in relation to my base of support.
So proprioception would have to do with like the Golgi.
Yes. Joint receptors, Golgi tendon organs, muscle spindles, pressure receptors if you're looking at your feet. So to maintain balance, if I'm going to be on balance, center of gravity must be over my base of support. Doesn't have to be in the middle of my base of support. So sometimes we don't want it to be in the middle of the base of the support. So in this picture, we're looking at someone in a weight room, right? And they're going to pick this bar up, and they've got relatively wide stance. Here's their base of support. If I'm going to pick the bar up and not fall over, then I better keep my center of gravity within this base. Right? Generally, in that kind of a lift, I'm going to encourage someone to keep their center of gravity as close to the middle of the base as possible, right? Because I don't want them waving backwards and forwards with this great big heavy weight on the top. I want them here, where everything's relatively safe, right? What about if I'm a sprinter then? If I'm doing a sprint start out of a pair of blocks, stability, mobility trade-off, where do I want my center of gravity in relation to the base of support? Anybody a sprinter? No sprinters this semester? All right, so I'm here, right? Where do I want to be here?
I'll be leaning forward.
Just before, I want to lean forwards. Why do I want to lean forwards? What does that do to my center of gravity? Pushes it forwards. What's the other thing they tell you to do? Do I want my bum down here? Up. Right? So actually, sprint starts are very interesting mechanically.
So it's like a loaded sprint, right? Pretty much.
Because if my center of gravity is in the middle of my base of support or towards the back side, when that gun goes off, in order to move forwards, right? I have to be off balance, right? Because if I'm on balance, I'm not moving forwards. So I have to move my center of gravity all the way over in order to start running. Where's the rest of the race by then? 30 yards down the track. But that didn't get me anywhere. So when I sprint start, I want my center of gravity as close to the front edge of my base of support as possible. As soon as it crosses the line, you're off balance. So if I do this, right, I can move quite a lot and not fall over. As soon as I go over my base of support, you fall. Right? As soon as I go over my base of support, I fall. So how far can I go before I'm over my base of support? So if I'm sprinting, as soon as the gun goes, I need to start running.
Absolutely.
Right? So I have to have my center of gravity as close to the front as possible so that when I want to fall,
It's a trajectory.
I can fall straight away. Okay? I want to be able to be off balance and push and get my trajectory moving forwards as quickly as I can. What happens if I time it wrong? What happens if I lean and lean and lean and lean and my center of gravity goes over the front line of my base of support? And what's that? Now we're disqualified, right? So, practicing starts is really important because I've got to be right on the cusp, right on the border so I can get the fastest start possible, but I've got to not go over the edge and get disqualified. Okay? Does that make sense? So I want my center of gravity high, because I want to be as least stable as possible without losing my balance. So I want my center of gravity up, I want the hips high. I want to lean and lean and lean and lean, and hopefully time so that I don't miss the gun. If I play safe, right, and I stay in my nice little balanced position, I'm not going to get disqualified, but how far behind everybody, I'm not going to win the race, unless I'm really way quicker than everybody else, right? Because I can keep my balance, not get disqualified, but now I'm playing catch up to everybody else all the way down the straight. So mechanics becomes super, super important when we're looking at where the center of gravity is in relation to the base of support. So, if it's highly stable, generally that's an easier version of something. So if I'm teaching someone a brand new skill that needs to be relatively unstable when it's being done well, then as the teacher, I have to create a more stable version when I first introduce the skill and teach the skill, right? Because if people keep falling over as they're trying this thing, again, you guys are not typical, right? You might enjoy falling over, right? But most people don't. So I don't want them to be falling over when they're learning. That's not fun. So that generally means I need the widest base of support I can create and still see some version of the skill. Okay. So here we've got really wide hands, She's lowered her center of gravity closer to the floor by bending her knees and splitting her legs, so that drops her center of gravity down. So for a handstand, this is pretty stable. Right? Here, she's on one hand. Here's her other arm. Her center of gravity is high because her legs are straight and straight up. So this is highly unstable. She's got to be really, really strong to do this. Right? Teeny, teeny, tiny base of support, high center of gravity. Very unstable. Wide base of support, lower center of gravity, more stable. Notes there. All right. The brain, when we're looking at development of motor skills, the brain always goes stable first. Always. It is going to keep you stable before it allows you to risk falling over. And that explains a lot of what we see in the coming chapters. At the end of the chapter, they look at a 5-step process for detection of errors and suggestions for, at what point do I give a correction, what do I correct? You want to correct something that's going to help them maintain their balance if it's appropriate. So have a look at that. Be thinking about, as you're playing over the weekend, be thinking about, am I on balance or off balance? Right? And in this particular skill, what would be ideal? So if I'm frying an egg for breakfast, do I want to be on balance or off balance? Probably on balance, right? I don't want the egg to end up on the floor. It's going in my tongue. So I want to be on balance. If I'm running with my dog, do I want to be on balance or off balance? Little in between, but quite a lot off balance in relation, right? Because to run with the dog, I have to be off balance. If I'm on balance, I can't move forward. Because on balance is right here. If I want to move forwards, I would have to be off balance. Increased mobility, decreased stability. Right? So always the best way to learn, the best way to use the material so that it becomes obvious is to be thinking about it in your own life. Right? Where does it apply? What am I doing right now? Oh, okay. That makes sense. Move on. Right? But if you try to think about them every now and then, the principles will become more sensible. All right? All right. Have a great weekend, guys.